Welcome to the Freedom to Learn podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Gentles. This season, we're diving into what it means to return education to states, communities, and families. And we're exploring what becomes possible when education is freed from union dominance and federal control.
School choice is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Every child, regardless of race or wealth or ethnicity, deserves access to an excellent education. This tax credit provision will unleash billions of dollars every single year for scholarships for kids to attend the K through 12 school of their choice.
On behalf of everyone at the Defense of Freedom Institute, we wish our Freedom to Learn listeners a very happy and healthy Thanksgiving. We're truly grateful for you. We're re-airing an important episode with U.S. Senator Ted Cruz that was originally released right after President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Reconciliation Bill. Senator Cruz joined the podcast to share a behind-the-scenes look into how the federal scholarship tax credit for contributions to scholarship granting organizations became part of that big bill and now law. Senator Ted Cruz protected the new federal scholarship tax credit from the Senate Parliamentarian, fought off an amendment to strip out the provision, and met with the president to advocate for the school choice tax credit. We also talk about the expansion of 529 plans that he championed and how both provisions will transform education nationwide. Senator Ted Cruz, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
Jenny, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
A federal school choice provision that you've championed for years was on the verge of being cut from the reconciliation package as it made its way through the Senate. Could you walk us through how you managed to overcome the parliamentarians' concerns about the scholarship tax credit?
Well, listen, this was an enormous battle, and 3 times the school choice provision was on the verge of being cut, and the parliamentarian was saying it would not satisfy the rules for reconciliation. I went and personally argued the case to the parliamentarian myself. That's unusual. Normally, staff argues that back and forth. And I worked with the parliamentarian to say, okay, what specifically are the concerns you have? How can we change this to satisfy those concerns? And so we ended up modifying the provision multiple times to get through the parliamentarian. But at the end of the day, it was a success. We rewrote it. And I actually think what we rewrote is even more powerful than what we started out with. And so this provision now, the way it's structured, every single taxpayer in America can give up to $1,700 a year to a scholarship granting organization in the states. And when you do so, you will get a dollar for dollar federal tax credit on what you owe the IRS. What does that mean? If you owe the IRS $3,000 and you write a $1,700 check to a scholarship granting organization, then you only owe the IRS $1,300. In other words, it's basically free for the taxpayer to give that money to scholarships. Now, the way we structured it, and we had to do this, initially it was all 50 states would have scholarship granting organizations. The parliamentarian raised an objection with that. She didn't think we could force it on blue states. And so what we did instead is we restructure it so states opt in to allowing the scholarship granting organizations to give scholarships in their states. Every taxpayer can give and get the tax credit. Even in a blue state, you can give, but the state has to opt in to being able to receive the money. The effect of this, this tax provision is permanent. It is in the tax code. It has no expiration date. And it is going to result in billions and billions of new scholarship money coming in to scholarship granting organizations to help kids go to the K through 12 school of their choice. It is by orders of magnitude the most far-reaching federal school choice legislation that has ever passed. And over time, it is going to impact and help millions and millions of kids across the country.
Senator Cruz, thank you for those conversations that you had with the Senate parliamentarian. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't had those. The senator from Hawaii proposed an amendment that would have killed this provision.
Yes.
And you fought that off.
We fought it off, and we preserved the school choice provision. You know, I got to say, it really is an astonishing thing that today's Democrat Party is all in on fighting for kids to be able to go to the school of their choice. I think school choice is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. I think it is foundational to every other issue. You know, when I was first elected to the Senate 13 years ago, I told my wife, Heidi, at the time, I said, listen, if when I am dead and buried, if my tombstone says that Ted played a meaningful part in helping bring about school choice to the kids in Texas and kids across America, I said, I'll die a very happy man. Because in terms of a legacy, in terms of making the American dream a reality for millions of kids, school choice is the single most important policy. And it is amazing that today's Democrats, you look at the kids that are trapped in failing schools. They are overwhelmingly low-income kids, and a great many of them are African-American kids and Hispanic kids. And the Democrats run around and say that they're fighting for African-Americans and fighting for Hispanics, and yet the Democrat Party at the national level, at the state level, at the local level, is bought and paid for by the teachers' union bosses. And so they fight at every level to close the school doors. It's not much different than Bull Connor in the 1950s and 60s, also a Democrat, blocking the doors of the schools and not wanting to integrate and saying, we're going to ignore federal law and we're not going to allow African-American kids into our schools. That's what the Democrats did in the 1950s and 60s, and Eisenhower sent in the National Guard to overcome that massive resistance from Democrats, and Democrats today are the same thing. They put in an amendment and said, we want to prevent kids from getting these scholarships, and every single Democrat, all of them, voted to strip these scholarships out. Thankfully, we won the amendment vote and it stayed in, but we won it by one vote. It was very close.
You also met with the president about the tax credit. What did you convey to him?
So I went about 4 weeks ago to the Oval Office. I sat down. I brought with me Byron Donalds and I brought with me Burgess Owens, both members of the House, both dear friends, and they're both passionate about choice.
Very passionate, very outspoken.
And the three of us sat in the Oval with the president and we said, listen, there are lots of things that are really important in this one big, beautiful bill, lots of things that matter. But what I suggested, I said, Mr. President, we all ought to collectively think about legacy. What will make a real difference? What will people remember in this bill 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now? And what the three of us argued to the president is that this provision, this school choice provision, will be the single most impactful provision in the entire bill because it's going to enable millions of kids who otherwise would have been trapped in a failing school to get a terrific education and go on to get a good job and have raise a family and achieve the American dream. And so at the time, the House of Representatives had passed a version of my legislation. But the House of Representatives, I'm very glad they did it. They started the process by passing it. But there were several problems with the bill the House had passed. Number one, unfortunately, a poison pill had been added to that bill. And the poison pill would have made virtually every Catholic school and parochial school not able to participate in the scholarships, which would have been disastrous. It would have kneecapped the program from the beginning. Number two, the way the House structured it, the scholarships were up to $5 billion a year for 4 years, and then it ended after 4 years. And what I argued to the president, I said, number one, we need to get rid of the poison pill. Number two, we cannot have this end after 4 years. We need to extend it. We need to make it permanent, because if it ends, the Democrats at the behest of the teachers' unions will let it expire and kill it. And so we know there's massive political opposition and we cannot put an expiration date. And I said, we need to make it bigger and bolder. Those were my three asks. And Byron and Burgess were emphatically leaning in. I told President Trump, I said, look, if we get this done, you may well go down in history as one of the greatest civil rights presidents America has ever seen. Now, your critics will never admit that. But the reality is, this will help millions of low-income kids have a chance to get an education that they're being denied right now. We ended up getting all three of those done in the Senate bill. So we stripped out the poison pill. It's gone. Instead of expiring after 4 years, this provision is permanent. And we ended up scrapping the model of a cap of $5 billion and instead picking an amount, $1,700, that taxpayers can pay as many as want. And I think in time, we will see a lot more than $5 billion being given each year. I think if you think about it across the country, if you're a taxpayer and you support school choice, it is a no-brainer that you should give at least $1,700 every year to a scholarship granting organization because it is free to you. I think that's going to end up a lot more than $5 billion a year. And I'll tell you, Jenny, there's also an aspect of this which I'm really fond of, which is there is a political dynamic that is going to expand choice even in blue states. And I want you to think of this. This is really the mirror image. It's the opposite of what Obamacare did with Medicaid expansion. So with Obamacare, it expanded Medicaid. Medicaid historically covered really needy people, kids, people with severe disabilities. Medicaid was designed to care for the most needy. Obamacare expanded it to include healthy adults. And Obamacare incentivized the states to expand Medicaid because Obamacare reimburses the states 90% of the cost of covering healthy adults. Mm-hmm. And so many of the states have expanded Medicaid. Texas has not. It actually ends up hurting your health care for low-income people. But the pressure every year, if you're a red state that has not expanded Medicaid, you get pressure every year from the hospitals that they come to the state legislature. They say, look at all this free money. The federal government is giving all this free money, and we're saying no to free money, and it's a political ratchet. Well, we've done the exact opposite here. My assumption is at the outset, red states will opt in. Texas is going to opt in. Florida is going to opt in. And my assumption, unfortunately, is blue states will opt out. New York will say no. California will say no. Now, New York residents can still give the contributions. California residents can still give the contributions, but none of the scholarships will be able to go to those states because the idiot politicians there think the kids don't want scholarships. But then, Jenny, play it forward a year or two or three or four. As parents in New York start looking around going, wait a second, there are billions of dollars of scholarships going to kids in Florida, going to kids in Texas. Why do those kids get scholarships and my kids don't? And I think you will see over time a growing political constituency in blue states to say, enough already with the teachers union bosses. We want scholarships for our kids too, because we're seeing the results. Look, with billions of dollars of new scholarships, you're also going to see new schools started in the inner cities, schools that are meeting the needs of kids who otherwise are not getting a good education. And so I think this dynamic over time, my prediction is in a decade, all 50 states will have opted in, but it will take time for that political ratchet to play out.
I hear you saying that the opt-in component of this perhaps is not a problem and the pressure will result in all the states opting in. Do you think that there are opportunities, whether through the legislative process or the rulemaking process, to improve on this historic provision, perhaps allowing businesses to contribute, perhaps lifting that $1,700 amount, perhaps at some point lifting that state opt-in requirement?
So two of those three things could be done on reconciliation. So, and by the way, the Speaker of the House has said that he intends to do one or even two more reconciliation bills. So we could go back to the well. We could certainly allow corporations to give as well. The initial version that I drafted included corporations as well as individuals. That could be added on reconciliation. The cap could also be raised on reconciliation. 1,700 was chosen because the projection was done. That would cost as much money as the previous version of the bill, and so we were operating within some spending constraints, which is why 1,700 was set. The opt-in would be a problem, getting rid of that on reconciliation, because that was basically forced by the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian. Her judgment was that it was a major policy change, forcing school choice into blue states that didn't want it. And so we had to make the concession, making it opt-in, or she would have stricken the entire provision. So that one, I'm not optimistic we could change on reconciliation, but 1 and 2 we could. The opt-in we could change on what's called regular order, which is just legislation that is moving. But for that to happen, you got to have 60 votes in the Senate, which means you need at least 7 Democrats. We right now have 0 Democrats. So I'm not optimistic anytime soon. Every Democrat in the Senate opposes school choice. Every Democrat in the Senate is fighting to slam the doors on kids uh, getting out of failing schools, getting a chance to have a better education. And it's not complicated. You know, one of the presidents of one of the big teachers unions was asked several years ago, how come you don't fight for kids? And his answer was, well, kids don't pay union dues. I mean, this is, it is, you know, Jenny, there are issues. There are lots of issues in politics on which there are reasonable arguments on both sides. And reasonable people can disagree. Should a tax rate be higher or lower? Reasonable people can have a differing view on how high the tax rate should be, and that's part of politics. School choice is the only issue I know of on which there are no reasonable views on the other side. It is, every argument on the other side is based on either ignorance or deliberate deception. And so I've been involved in the school choice movement for 30 years. This has been a passion project for me my entire adult life, fighting to bring about school choice. And you know, 30 years ago, you had arguments that at the time school choice was largely untested. So the opponents would say, well, choice will destroy the public schools. Well, gosh, if that would happen, that's a serious problem. I would not support choice if it would destroy the public schools, because the vast majority of our kids are educated in the public schools. We now know that argument is categorically false, because choice has been implemented all over the country, and everywhere it's implemented, it works. It's a success. We see the kids that exercise choice and that go to other schools, their reading scores go up, their math scores go up, their graduation rates go up, their college enrollment goes up. But we also know now that choice is good for the public schools, that competition is good, that the kids who stay in the public school, don't use a scholarship, don't go anywhere, when there is competition, their reading scores go up, their math scores go up. It improves education across the board. That's why it's so powerful.
As we conclude, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the federal scholarship tax credit, and I'll throw in the 529 expansion that also was part of the One Big Beautiful Bill and something that you've championed for a long time. How will those change the education landscape over time?
Well, every bit of this is about empowering parents and putting you, the mom, you, the dad, in charge of education for your kids, because you know what's best for your kids. You love your children and you want the best education possible for your kids. You know, you mentioned 529s. I'll actually tell you a story of the last time we did reconciliation, which was 2017. And it was the first Trump tax cut. And College 529s being expanded was my legislation then. And so I had an amendment that took College 529 savings accounts, which are tax advantage accounts that you could save for college, and my amendment expanded it to cover K through 12 education. And on the floor, there were 52 Republicans. We were voting, it was past midnight, and we lost first one Republican, Susan Collins, then a second Republican, Lisa Murkowski. So it was 50-50. The Senate floor staff picks up the phone. They call the vice president's residence. It's past midnight, so Mike Pence is at home. They tell the vice president, okay, we lost Collins and Murkowski. It looks like we need your vote as the tiebreaker. So the vice president gets in the car, gets in the motorcade, and begins heading down to the Capitol. Tim Scott and I are down on the floor, and we're trying to convince Lisa Murkowski to switch her vote. We're trying to make the case to her that she should vote with us. While we're doing so, behind us walks Joe Manchin, a Democrat from West Virginia, and he votes yes. And there is an audible gasp in the well of the Senate. So the Senate floor staff, they pick up the phone, they call the vice president's office, they say, well, Mr. Vice President, looks like we don't need your vote. We just got Manchin. So the vice president turns the motorcade around, begins heading back to the residence. Manchin goes and sits down, and a sea of Democrats descend upon him. Chuck Schumer comes over, they're yelling at him, they're beating him with sticks. And 5 minutes later, Manchin sheepishly walks up and he shifts his vote to a no.
Goodness.
So the Senate floor staff, they pick up the phone, they call the vice president's office, they say, we need your vote again. The vice president turns the motorcade around a second time. It takes about 20 minutes to get from the Naval Observatory, where the vice president lives, to the Capitol. About 20 minutes later, Vice President Mike Pence walks to the floor, ascends the dais, says the ayes being 50, the nays being 50, the Senate being equally divided, the presiding officer votes in the affirmative, the amendment is adopted. And with that, we passed what was then the single most far-reaching federal school choice legislation that ever passed. And it enables parents and grandparents to save up to $10,000 a year and spend up to $10,000 a year for K through 12 education for their kids, benefiting up to 50 million kids nationwide. This time around, I also had legislation on 529s where we expanded what you can spend 529s. We raised the cap from 10,000 to 20,000 and we indexed it for inflation. So now you can devote a lot more resources. And it previously was limited just to tuition. Now you can use a 529 to pay for books or tutoring or other educational expenses. And so 529s are a much more powerful way to empower parents to save for the needs of their kids. And you put that on top of the scholarships, the billions in scholarships that are going to come. And this legislation is the biggest school choice legislation America has ever seen. And it dramatically changes the prospects, the hope, and the future for our kids.
Senator Cruz, as a parent of two high schoolers at a faith-based high school, I want to thank you for that 529 expansion. That personally will change our financial situation in our home. And on behalf of parents across the country, thank you for what you've done when it comes to the federal scholarship tax credit. Thank you for your commitment to education freedom. And thank you for joining Freedom to Learn.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for your leadership. And I've got two high school girls as well. So it's, it's always calm. There's never any drama at home.
Oh, yes. Same. Thank you so much, Senator Cruz.
Thank you.
Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. Learn more about our work at dfipolicy.org. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Send feedback, questions, and episode ideas to podcast@dfipolicy.org. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow and review Freedom to Learn on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend.